Why is it that whenever a woman includes romance in her book, it's instantly relegated to chick lit or women's fiction, whereas when a man includes romance in his book, it's seen as adding depth to the story and it's not pigeonholed into one of these categories? How do epic fantasies written by men retain their title of epic fantasy even if they've got a lot of romance in, whereas a woman struggles to get her book defined as epic fantasy? Why are romance books considered for women only when love is something we all experience? And why, when a woman writes about love, is it considered to be lightweight and fluffy when love is one of the most profound human experiences? Why do epic fantasy authors such as Robin Hobb and N.K. Jemisin feel the need to make their names more gender neutral when most male fantasy authors simply use their full name? Editing Chess here. I appreciate there are, of course, very big male authors such as J.R.R. Tolkien who do use their initials. However, these tend to be stylistic choices and academic convention rather than for the purpose of obscuring their gender. There's many women who've been told by their publishers to obscure their gender, to use their initials, to try and ensure that men still read their books and to try and ensure that their books are taken seriously. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Back to past chess. Present chess. You know what I mean. Before we go any further, let's define epic fantasy, romance fantasy, more commonly known as romantasy, and fantasy romance. Epic fantasy is usually large scale, it's immersive, it's set fully outside of our world, it normally involves multiple kingdoms and its own magic system, its own political system, and there's normally high stakes. Romantasy, or romance fantasy, is romance first, and the romance must be equally as important to the plot as the fantasy. Fantasy romance, on the other hand, is fantasy first, but then with a subplot of romance that is important to the plot. Brandon Sanderson writes epic fantasy, and there's no doubt about that. And I love Brandon Sanderson, but I will say Mistborn, which is one of the ones that I love, and I think it was the first one I read by Sanderson. There is a strong subplot of romance in that, and it's in Era 1 of Mistborn and Era 2. Warbreaker, another one I love, again, strong subplot of romance. You see, when a male fantasy author includes a lot of romance into their fantasy, it's seen as deepening the epic and adding layered and complex characters. And I agree, it does do that. It's just that when a woman does it, hers then seem to become fantasy romance or romance fantasy. And if you look online, you'll see that there's a lot of women who have said that they've really struggled to get that epic fantasy label attached to their work, or that they felt the need to put their name as gender neutral because they were worried that as a woman they wouldn't be seen as an epic fantasy writer. You see, our genre categories aren't neutral. They're shaped by who's writing the book and for whom. Now, I accept that Sanderson's work has a lot less romance in than something like ACOTAR, which is romantasy, and I'm not saying that those books should be in the same category, but I am saying that these books, as an example, do fit into many of the categories that we'd also associate with epic fantasy. And I would say particularly the third book, Court of Wings and Ruins in particular, I would say has pretty much everything we would normally associate with an epic fantasy. This one in particular leaves heavily into war strategy, political alliances. The stakes are high and large scale, and of course it's part of a series that spans our hero's journey, which is very typical of what you would find in epic fantasy. But I've never heard anyone refer to these as epic fantasy. Instead, people tend to dismiss this and the series in general as faery smut. You see, it goes romance that deepens the plot, faery smut. And there's nothing wrong with calling a book romantasy. It can be a really great way to find romance-heavy fantasy, so I can absolutely see why there's a separate genre for it. But I'm saying that women who write epic fantasies shouldn't have to fight harder to have theirs recognised as epic fantasy. And I'm also saying that romantasies shouldn't be devalued or mocked. And it does seem to me like there's almost this element of shame to reading a romantasy book, which I just don't think there should be. Back when Jane Austen wrote her works that we now consider masterpieces and classics and things that everyone should read, they were completely mocked and they were thought of as chick lit. And now we do the same to women who are reading contemporary romance, to women who are reading romantasy. And don't get it twisted, I'm not comparing Sarah J Maas to Jane Austen. But I am saying that people mock in the same way. My husband was at work recently and one of his co-workers was reading A Court of Mist and Fury, and when she realised that he knew what it was, she was kind of embarrassed to be reading it. I also wonder if Booktube channels that specialise in talking about fantasy books, in particular the ones that are run by women, would feel more wary about posting a really positive review of a romantasy book because they'd be worried that their audience might not take them as seriously or as a serious fantasy reader anymore. I'm sorry for this random little interlude here, but look, I filmed the video that you're watching right now 4 weeks ago and I haven't released it yet, and it's because I just kept thinking there was something missing from it. I still think there is. There's something I feel like I haven't said right or something missing, and you know, people in the comments, you can help me out with this. There's something missing from my argument. However, I have put my finger on one of the things that is missing, and that is thanks to a very sexist comment that I saw on Goodreads. So thank you, John, for your super sexist comment because it's reminded me of one of the things that I think is missing. Oh, also, I'll totally show you that comment in a second. I think what's missing from this video is that the issue doesn't stop at how we label books and how we police what women read and how we police what brings women joy. It also carries on to how we receive women's opinions in literature and the way that we delegitimize women's opinions. I've seen women give honest and thoughtful critiques of why they personally don't enjoy the work of a literary giant such as Hemingway or Murakami, only to be told to go back to chick lit, as if they are simply not intelligent enough to understand a real book and should go back to their less serious and more frivolous books. Here's the comment I mentioned, somewhere here, and this comment is a really great example of how misogyny and literary elitism can intersect. And by the way, I found this underneath a 1-star review for a Murakami book, and unfortunately this was not the only comment like it. There were quite a few like this. Quite a few people told this woman to get back to chick lit, to go read her romantasy books. Someone left a snarky comment telling her that they hope she enjoyed the romantasy book that she was reading. And they added on to save the real pieces of literature for us serious readers. And sadly that last one that I mentioned was from a woman, and I think that's a great example of some internalised misogyny right there. But yeah, there's also a big double standard here because I find that male-dominated genres such as military fiction, sports memoirs, spy thrillers, they don't get that same level of criticism about how they are not real books and not real literature and how they're not worth reading. And that seems to be the case even if they are reliant on tropes or formulaic writing. So yeah, I really do think that the devaluing of romantasy and of romance actually goes back to the issue of policing women's joy again. And I think that I kind of missed out going into depth in this in the original part that I recorded, so that's kind of why I'm adding it here. And it's not even just about labels and the labels we apply to books and the way that we treat women who read certain types of books. It's also the way that entire genres are dismissed as badly written, but only when they centre around romance and women's stories. But that's a whole conversation on its own, and we're going to have it, just not in this video because I don't want it to get too long and too convoluted. So I will pop you back to 4 weeks ago chess for the outro now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you see a difference on how we label romantasy books and how we label fantasy romance based on who writes them? Do you think epic fantasy is still a male-dominated space, and do you think it's harder for women to have their books featured in that space? If you're a romance reader, whether that's romantasy or contemporary romance, do you ever feel as though you're being judged as reading something that is less worthwhile? I'd also love to hear if you've read any books with themes of war, strategy, politics that you feel have been treated differently because they were written by a woman and happen to also contain romance. Thanks so much for listening to my ramblings on this. Yeah, I really want to know what you think, so drop me a comment and I'll hopefully see you soon. Happy reading!